if we're not approaching these things and we're not being able to find in ourselves genuine love and compassion for those people we're responding to, then I think we need to step back. Like, I just think if we're honest, we should recognize that we're resounding gongs, we're clanging cymbals, and figure out what's off in me that's not allowing me to do this in love and compassion.
Before we get into Ephesians 1, I would like to ask you a couple questions about the whole Calvinism thing. First and foremost, when did you start becoming interested in the Calvinism debate? I know you said that, this is a recent thing that you started on your podcast. Have you been interested in it before that, or did something happen to make you like, I got to address Calvinism right now?
Yeah. So my interest began really probably about 10 years ago. Okay. And so I recently started, I guess I should have said I started talking about Calvinism again on my channel, because about 5 years ago or so, I put out a handful of videos on Ephesians 1 and then Romans 9, kind of a short little series on that. And so, but yeah, it's about 10 years ago. Really, it came from, there's a variety of things I think that caused it. One had to do with just where I was personally at in my wrestlings with who God was, and just kind of in a place of wrestling with concepts of like the unforgivable sin, and so in that, I think, very dark place in my life, kind of trying to figure out what is God actually like, and then in that period coming across places like Romans 9, while at the same time being familiar and listening some here and there to John Piper, and realizing that, there's this passage here that this guy who I respect, and many of the close people around me do as well. And here this passage I'm coming across that seems to be saying that what God is like, or at least on the surface, is that he's just, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is God can do what he wants. And if you have an issue with something he does, shut your mouth, because he's God, and who are you to question him? And it's like, well, in a sense, that's true. But also, is that really the aspect of God's nature that really he wants at the forefront? That he's so powerful, he's so sovereign, he can do whatever he wants. And really, that's kind of in many ways, the foundation of the Calvinist gospel, in a sense. I don't know if maybe that's too extreme, but it's just this idea that God can do what he wants. That's kind of the emphasis of their gospel. It's like, God is so sovereign and so powerful. Who are you, oh man, to question God? Like, that's what I feel like, what I discovered is that, like, that's the essence of God in Calvinism, that you really come away with. Yes, he has love to some, but you need to know that he's wrathful, and he wants to demonstrate his wrath equally. And I would say a good argument could be made, if Calvinism were true, God actually is more interested in demonstrating more of his wrath than he is his love. Because I think, within Calvinism, I think it'd be an uphill battle to try to argue that more people are going to be elected to salvation than are going to be reprobated. And so all that to say, I just think there's this portrayal of God that, everybody has this immediate instinctual aversion to, I think rightly so. But that caused me, because I wasn't in a place, and I'm still not, where I was willing to say, okay, if that's what the Bible says, I'm just going to throw it out. I wanted to know, is that actually what it says? Because if it is, I'm going to have to I'll deal with that, and I'll kind of adjust, and I'll figure out how to, work through that. And so basically that turned into just when I get on something like that, that becomes sort of a consuming thing, where that's all I can think about. And so I had a job where I could listen to debates, I could listen to sermons, I could listen to lectures, I could listen through my audio Bible. And so for 8 hours or more a day, that's all I would do. And found myself, as I was praying and, listening to places like Romans 9, Ephesians 1, having these like aha moments of, that's what this is saying. And not to say that I am some kind of authority, or, this is how cults get started. I had a divine revelation from God, and so I'm right here. But I do think God will get open eyes and give some insight into these things. And I think all of us in some sense think he's doing that. And I feel like that happened for me with these different passages where it just became this thing of, oh, I see why they think it says this, but I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't say, I know that is not what Paul's trying to say there. And so that actually enabled me to feel a compassion for Calvinists and not like this anger that I just want to go out and show you how dumb you are. But I genuinely felt as I started making videos around 5 years ago, a genuine love for those who thought differently than me as I would explain why I disagreed.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a bit more than you wanted for an intro, but that's kind of a bit of an idea of how I kind of got started with all this.
No, I appreciate it, man. I really do. I saw the where you were going over Ephesians 1, and I guess the guys from Apologia had actually responded to one of your emails. You and Pastor Luke were in dialogue with each other there for a little bit. I'm curious.
Yep.
I saw Josh on unmute his mic, so I'll give it to him next. But did that ever get resolved? Or did it just kind of burn out a little bit?
It ended there. So my evaluation of that situation was, me and Luke were going back and forth in email. And I get the impression, maybe I'm biased, but as I still replay that clip, I feel like Luke didn't know how to answer the question. And I feel like when he took that to Jeff and tried to explain it, which I don't blame Jeff, because listening back through as Luke reads the question I was presenting him, it's like, well, can you read that again a couple times so I can?
Right.
But Jeff's initial reaction was just like, well, I don't see anything interesting about that at all. And I was like, well, that's the problem, Jeff. Like, that's the problem here, that you don't see anything interesting about what I think is problematic about your view of union with Christ in Ephesians 1. And so no, that didn't ever get resolved. I think I just kind of left it at responding to them in a video. I didn't figure that Jeff was going to jump onto a video with me and talk or anything, which would be fun to do. But yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And maybe whenever we get to Ephesians 4 here in a little bit, I would like to go over that with you, because I understood where you were coming from the first time. But I get kind of, going back and putting myself in their shoes with the eternal decree concept. That's where the sticking point for them was. And so I get it. But Josh, you had something that you were going to, I think, anyway, I saw you.
I was just going to say, it's nice to meet another kindred spirit, and the way that you described yourself and the way that you developed concern for the other person that you're talking to by identifying with how they think, still thinking they're wrong, but then feeling for them in that error. Like, I would be passionate also. How can I best address this person without making an enemy, but still making a point? I think that's really cool. I very much identify with that. Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that, I don't know. This is something that's easy to say and I think for Christians, evangelicals, to just kind of nod in agreement and then kind of move on. But I think the weight of the emphasis that this whole thing Christians have this ability to do right now on YouTube and social media, to get on and talk and share and interact with people, and the amount of a complete disregard for, like, 1 Corinthians 13, if I have all wisdom, if I have all knowledge, if I have everything, but I don't have love, I have nothing. They're just, in so many cases I see, and it's, I can slip into that too, but I just think that there's something powerful, I think, about being able to be in a comment responding to somebody you disagree with, or in a video, and recognizing that you have in yourself a genuine love and compassion for that person. That's something that I think God can give you, and only He can give you that. But I think if we're not approaching these things, and we're not being able to find in ourselves genuine love and compassion for those people we're responding to, then I think we need to step back. Like, I just think if we're honest, we should recognize that we're resounding gongs, we're clanging cymbals, and figure out what's off in me that's not allowing me to do this in love and compassion. Fix that, and then go back into it if that's what you're supposed to do.
Right on. Heck yes. 100%, man.
Right on.
I think it would be a better place. The internet and the Christian sphere on the internet could be a better place if more people took that
I agree.
seriously.
Yeah.
We got a good thing going is if Christians would just take advantage of that opportunity. I mean, we have opportunity right in front of us. So right on. Well, Jordan, I think you told us, I was going to ask you, why did you decide to make Calvinism a primary area of focus in your apologetic? But would you say that that's the main reason, is that your love for, primarily your love for these people? Or was there like something in the past that happened where you were like, okay, I'm shifting to Calvinism. This is why I have to do this. Like, if there was that moment, what would it have been? Yeah,
honestly, like it gets into what we're going to talk about hopefully today in Ephesians 1, because, the somewhat ignorant, not to say that pejoratively, I just think it is what it is, but the ignorant kind of assertion that so many Calvinists have when they see somebody like me making a video on YouTube is the immediate response. The guttural response is, oh, you're just a free will worshiping, man-centered. It's like as if what I'm concerned about is upholding my free will, which I don't think I've maybe said the word or phrase free will a couple times in all my videos, but mostly it's probably telling Calvinists that that's not my argument. And so my thing really came down to this concept of union with Christ. And this is a little bit where it gets a little bit tricky, because there's, I think, some things that have to be kind of established and clarified and explained to even understand why would union with Christ be a problem with Calvinism. But to me, that's what it ultimately came down to. So I'd say it's a mixture of like I feel like in Calvinism, it's at its root, I feel like you can analyze it and you can see over and over again just a disconnect from I guess accurate Christology and a kind of flip-flopping all over themselves and self-contradiction when it comes to this concept of union with Christ. Yeah. And I think that all is so deeply there, that so many of their ideas, and it shows up particularly in Ephesians 1, are deeply rooted, I think, in that misunderstanding of union with Christ and what that is. And this idea that every spiritual blessing has been given to us in a specific single context. And that is this context of in him. And I just think that they emphasize, or they'll recognize certain aspects of it and then immediately go on to contradict what they just said. And so I think that's something that I could set aside every other thing about Calvinism. And that one point is really the thing that, to me, is what I call like the critical error in Calvinism, because to me, it really is.
The fatal flaw of Calvinism.
The fatal flaw, the Achilles heel. Yeah. Right
on. Well, we'll jump into Ephesians next. Then I do want to give Dane a chance to ask a question or say anything before we jump into it. Dane, do you have anything for us? Or
I just appreciate where Jordan's coming from. I don't know if I have a specific question off the top of my head, but
sure.
I definitely agree that we have to meet our mission field with love, whether that's in person, face to face, or online. And I really am glad to hear you talking like that and mentioning 1 Corinthians 13, that if we're not loving our mission field, then there's really no point in even being in the mission field. So we all have to check our hearts, check our motivations, and make sure that we're really caring about souls and caring about people when we address them, whether that's someone who we see as like entirely lost, like, a non-believer or a Muslim or something like that, or someone that we just think is in critical error in their understanding of the gospel, something like Calvinism. And then, this was a bit. We talked a little bit before this about before the show started, so I just thought I'd throw it out there for you to add on to. But I've been a Methodist Arminian pretty much my whole life. I did flirt with Calvinism quite strongly in college and even beyond that, when some of those preachers are amazing. I mean, you gotta, you mentioned John Piper, you got Paul Washer, Alistair Begg. I mean, they've got some Vodi Bakum. I mean, they've got some powerhouses out there. And, so I was flirting with it and listening to a lot of Calvinist preachers. But what I could never get over, the hurdle I could never get over, was Judgment Day. God is going to judge all humans and all angels, for that matter, and to me, it just seemed ludicrous that God could predetermine every single action and then judge us and condemn us for those actions. And on the Calvinist view, and I really don't want to straw man in any way, but on the Calvinist view, Judgment Day just feels like such a farce. And I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that, but that was the hurdle for me I could never quite get over.
Yeah. And I'll just say for their end of that, one is that I understand why initially to the Calvinists that would come across as just an emotional argument, which is an accusation I get a lot, or that, oh, I'm just bowing at the idol of my own concept of what God should do or what love should look like, which I think are just, false, demonstrably, because I think that even what you're expressing right there is something that can be established in passages like 1 Corinthians 13, where we have definitions of what love should look like, which should look like a true, genuine concern for the well-being of others. I don't see limits put on that, as in, you should love selectively because that's how your Father in heaven loves. He's very selective in Calvinism with which of his enemies he chooses to love. But yet Jesus says, just love your enemies. And he says, in doing this, you are being children of your Father in heaven, and you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Well, if we're to love perfectly as an imitation, Paul even says, imitate God as dearly beloved children and walk in love. Well, if we're going to imitate the God as described in Calvinism, then I don't think there's any way around it that at base level, our love has to be selective in nature. It cannot be a love that is given freely to any that we come across, where we're genuinely wanting the well-being of others. And to this, Calvinists would say, well, we don't know who the elect are, and so we just love everybody. I'd just say, well, it doesn't matter whether you know who the elect are or not. There are still non-elect people out there who God doesn't love. So even if you don't know and you're accidentally loving a non-elect person, well, you're not imitating your Father in heaven. You're not loving perfectly as he loves. And so this is something that I find myself when I'm trying to make my own videos about Ephesians 1, I get side railed on, because I think this is such a big issue, and I get quickly stirred up about it because I think it's something that is so quickly dismissed by Calvinists. And I understand that there are things like compatibilism that play into all this, and there's deeper philosophical arguments in response to how, man can be still held accountable that I haven't fully dived into. But I just think at the end of the day, like you're saying, whatever arguments you give or explanations you try to give to explain away why man wouldn't be condemnable for committing sins that God wanted him to do, I think at the end of the day, compatibilism, all these other things that you might bring to the table, you're still walking away with a God who is going to condemn people to eternal hell for committing sins that he ultimately wanted them and gave them no other option but to commit. And I don't know how Calvinists can offer a solution or a response to that can bring any real resolution other than a dismissal or like an appeal to mystery or a "who are you, O man," to answer back to God, all of which are non-answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just have one really quick thing to add. I agree with everything you said, and you articulated it very well. And one thing that I also say to the emotional appeal argument, because that does get thrown at us on the other side of the fence a lot. I agree that you can't build an argument off of pure emotion, but also you shouldn't have emotionless arguments either, right? Because we're made in the image of God. Our emotions are a gift from God. They're not like a bad thing. God gives us emotions for a reason. Therefore, I think that, again, you don't build everything off of emotions, but you also don't just dismiss emotions. If it doesn't feel like love, then maybe we should.
Maybe it's not
of love. So anyway, Tyler, I'm sorry I cut you off earlier.
Great point.
No, I was going to talk whenever you were still speaking, Dane, and so that's my bad. But I'll say this, talking the thing that led me out of Calvinism, one of the things anyway, was what you guys were just talking about, and on a fundamental level. And so I'm talking about in an ultimate sense. What I realized was there's no such thing as sin. If God determines all things, now granted, we can say, and I know Calvinists do make that distinction between his decretive will and his permissive will, right? But in the ultimate decretive will sense, there is no such thing as sin, because those people are doing exactly what God determines them to do. There is no ands, ifs, or buts about it. They are obeying him perfectly. Now, we can call that sin arbitrarily, I guess, whatever, but it means absolutely nothing in, like I said, in an ultimate sense. And so
it means no more than the lion that prefers to eat the zebra rather than the bush. You know, it's just, are you going to call that sin? Are you going to call it sin if a father demands that his child begins to flap his arms and fly into the sky and the child can't do it? Well, he's disobeying his father. That's sinful, rebellious. And I do feel like in the ultimate sense of things, I totally agree. Sin is just this arbitrary concept that we're applying for some reason, this idea of wrong and right taking place here. When I don't, arbitrary, I just feel like it is the word to define that whole aspect of it. I agree.
And I think, Josh, I know you say, arbitrary sometimes, but with meaning and purpose, that's an arbitrary use of the word, or that's use of the word that has no meaning or no purpose to it at that point, right? And so I don't know if you would, you're shaking your head. Yes, I would assume you would agree with that, but that's what kind of took me and made me really think. That and determinism in general was the two primary things that led me out. And so that's why I try to show people anymore is like, look, that there is no such thing ultimately. Anyway, I guess we can say that, right? But there's no meaning attached to it whenever we do.